What's up, everybody? Pod 2 of the T5S2 series is beginning now, and we have some insane lists to talk about. So let's get into these 16 lists from the second T5S2 tournament. So for those who don't know, we're moving T5S2 from being a single tournament with a prize pool. So the first tournament that we started back a couple weeks ago when I made my announcement video, we're now calling Pod 1, and that's going to retain its prize support. We're still giving away a Chaos Army for that, but because we've had so much interest, we've opened the event up to multiple pods. We're actually launching our pod number 2 right now, another 16-player tournament. Each of these tournaments is going to be run over the course of 1 month. You play one game per week, but usually the players are pretty psyched, and we're getting in multiple rounds in a single week, so they're going to be over pretty quickly. Each one is 16 players, so we play to having a single undefeated, and we're going to start tracking player scores throughout the series. At the end of the season, whenever we decide to end it, we might have some additional prizes for players who do well in the series, and we may also have an invitational tournament for players who have won their pod or have ranked highly in the standings. So far, super exciting to expand the T5S2 event like this, and I'm very excited to get more games on stream and see how it goes. But today, we're talking about pod number 2. We've just posted the pairings up this morning, and the players have begun to play their games. We're going to have some games streamed. Theoretically, we'll have some this weekend, and then throughout the course of the upcoming week, we'll have some games on stream on this channel for you guys to watch. But as you can see in this breakdown, we have a ton of chaos coming out of the woodwork. Still a pretty strong Imperium presence, especially with Imperial Soup. We have a lot of Imperial Soup lists, both with Sisters of Battle and with Imperial Guard, souping in with typically an Adeptus Astartes list, a lot of Blood Angels and Raptors. We also have more big showings from Adeptus Sororitas. We have one pure Adeptus Sororitas list in there, as well as I think one of these Imperial Soup lists is also bringing Sisters alongside it. We also see a lot of pure sub-factions in this pod, which we didn't so much in the other one, which I'm super excited about. Don Husin coming in, the Chaos Savant here, the Deathguard Extraordinaire, playing pure Deathguard, and an interesting list that we're going to talk about. We have Znar in here. Unfortunately, these two got paired round 1, but I'm going to hope to stream this game because we do have two pure Chaos sub-factions fighting each other. Thousand Suns versus Deathguard, and that's pure Thousand Suns. We got Rubric Marines all over the place. It's going to be sick. We also have a pure Ultramarines list, not something you see every day, but there are some awesome Ultramarine staples coming out of that one, as well as a pure Space Wolves. We have Salamanders in here, which are making an enormous comeback right now. Now that staying in Devastator Doctrine is not as important after the FAQ in February, Salamanders have kind of almost become the top Space Marine list outside Raptors or Raven Guard successors of some variety. Salamander, the AP -1 ignoring on Salamanders as people move towards lighter weapons that are better at killing hordes of infantry has become absolutely invaluable. So if you're bringing things like Gatling cannons or heavy bolters, those are going to bounce off these guys because most of their army's going to have a 2-up save in melee against that, and it's insanity. They're also insanely good at clearing out hordes because they can bring flamers with +1 to wound and maxing out their shots, as well as potentially +2 to wound between Recitation of Focus and Crucible of Battle on high volume units like Assault Centurions. As is to be expected, Chaos, super popular right now because of the aggressive meta of the game that we find ourselves in. Eldari as the kind of third wheel there between Imperial Soup and Chaos Soup. Eldar, and I believe both of these Eldar lists are mixed Eldar with all 3 codexes. So that's including Drukhari, Craft Worlds, and Harlequins all together in one list. So first up, covering lists here, we have Znar playing pure Thousand Suns. Now this is an awesome list. It's focused very heavily on basic infantry like Rubric Marines, which I think is super cool. Now, I imagine everyone in the game at this point has played against the dreaded Supreme Command from Thousand Suns with Ahriman and Demon Princes and potentially Sorcerers or just 2 Demon Princes and Ahriman just to blast spells at your opponent and deal a ton of damage. But not a lot of people have played against the other options in the Codex, and they don't tend to see a lot of play, but fortunately, the stuff in Ritual of the Damned really gave them a leg up. We have a lot of really cool tricksy abilities in this list. First up, we have a battalion detachment from Cult of Duplicity, so that if Znar decides to, allows him to use his Warlord trait on the Demon Prince of Tzeentch here. The Warlord trait from Cult of Duplicity lets you redeploy D3 units, so he can move around his Rubric Marines, or potentially, I believe this works. If you deploy your Scarab Occult Terminators, you reset them up using the normal rules for deployment and put them back into Teleport Strike. Alternatively, you can, just redeploy them normally and get the benefit of having, the optimal deployment. The other thing that Thousand Suns do now, which they didn't before Ritual of the Damned, they have the 1 CP stratagem Risen Rubricae, which lets you pick a unit of Rubric Marines and essentially forward deploy them, so they get the scout deployment. And I believe that is what this unit of 15 Rubric Marines is in here for. No special weapons on these guys. We just have the pistol on the Aspiring Sorcerer. But for 1 CP, you can put that anywhere on the table, and it should be noted, too, that we are playing, because this is the T5S2 event, we're playing a BCB ITC Ruins setup, which has these two insanely good ruins on the top and bottom of the map. So depending on the deployment, if you get a solid deployment, if you get a short table edge or something like that, instead forward deploy those Rubric Marines in one of these buildings and then immediately, have them in a position to threaten your opponent or to threaten forward objectives. If you get a corner deployment, you also have these ruins on the sides as well in order to fight over. And if you're going first, then you can use their awesome new ability, Infernal Fusillade, which lets you double fire any rapid fire weapons you have, as long as you didn't move, and that's with a unit of Rubric Marines or Scarab Occult Terminators, which you does have 2 units of. The other thing we should note is that a lot of people don't know what the basic Thousand Suns infantry do. They have this insane ability, All Is Dust, and we just talked about in Salamanders how good ignoring AP1 is, and All Is Dust adds +1 to your save as long as your opponent's damage characteristic is no greater than 1. It also, as a side note, removes the -1 to hit for moving and shooting heavy weapons. Znar here has elected to take Hellfire missile racks in both Scarab Occult Terminator units, which are heavy D3 crack missiles essentially, so they'll fire. They're only D3 damage, but 2 shots at strength 8 is very solid. As we talked about before, a lot of people are prioritizing low damage anti-infantry shooting with a high volume, and those Rubric Marines are absolutely going to shut that off, adding +1 to their armor save. This is even better than ignoring AP1 in most cases, because if somebody hits you with a heavy bolter, you're going to be at the same save that you were, so you're essentially ignoring that -1. But alternatively, if somebody shoots you with a regular bolter, you're going to be at a 2-up save there. If you're sitting with a Scarab Occult in cover, and somebody shoots you with an AP2 heavy bolter, you're still taking a 2-up save. That makes all of these units insanely resilient against a lot of the things that people are going to be taking in their list right now. A little side note as well there, all of their weapons are Inferno weapons, which means they're going to be coming in at AP -2, so they're going to punch right back through that AP ignoring that Salamanders would bring. The big downside is that we also talked about Sisters of Battle becoming more prevalent, and they, between an Imagifer and the sub-faction bonus of Order of the Valorous Heart, can get to ignoring AP -1 and -2. So that the AP -2 isn't going to be quite as good there, but it is good in the Marine Mirror. You can force those Intercessors and Tactical Marines to take saves on a 5+, which is real rough. Couple that in with being able to double shoot those weapons. You could potentially be shooting 30 Inferno Bolter shots, 60 with the Infernal Fusillade from these Rubric Marines, and that's going to be an absolutely immense amount of damage. The big downside of this faction is that we do see a lot of very hefty troops choices. They do have cultists to bring in some really cheap 40-point troops choices, but those Rubric Marines coming in at 91 points a unit without any special weapons, really. We just have that Aspiring Sorcerer, who is a Psyker, which is very good, but it does significantly increase the cost of those. I imagine these 2 5-mans maybe come in as engineers because they are so resilient, and just to cast some supporting spells from those Aspiring Sorcerers, while the Rubric Marines at the front get that forward deployment and hit hard. That's followed up, of course, with the Supreme Commands and the 2 Demon Princes. So it's going to be a little interesting to see if they can just bring the Bolter Fire and make that into a competitive list. I think they probably can. There's enough Terminators here to get some work done, and a lot of -2 bolters. Eventually we'll get there. Or this 2nd Battalion, as well as the Supreme Command, are in the Cult of Magic, so they can get in the Super Smiting Warlord trait to add +1 mortal wound to all of your damaging psychic powers. So you can crack through armor with those mortal wounds there, and also just double firing bolters to try to get the rest through. So overall, super cool to see Rubric Marines on the table. They're very cool models and a cool army concept. I'm really glad Ritual of the Damned gave them a couple more competitive options. Moving down to Tomb King 20 here, we have a Chaos Soup list, this time focusing very heavily on Chaos Knights. We have a Rampager Knight. That's going to be the double melee weapon knight that hits on 2s, keeping him super cheap because he's going to forward deploy and get all of the buffs to go very fast and probably eat all of the shots from turn 1. So you want him to soak the damage for your firepower. And so just keeping him as cheap as possible is good. And then that firepower, speaking of the firepower, we bring 2 Knight Despoilers, pretty standard loadout. Both have Iron Sword missile pods. We have a dual battle cannon and a dual Gatling cannon. Pretty straightforward Chaos Knight stuff. We have a little bit of flavor here with this Moirax War Dog. Now, I typically see the lightning locks on the Moirax because they're heavy 6 and Tesla with an AP value, which is insanity. The big downside of Tesla is it doesn't shoot through armor at all, but the Moirax it sure frickin' does. But we're seeing Graviton Pulsars on this guy. I'm not sure what to think about this guy. I've never seen this unit, but it is effectively a short-range kind of las cannon equivalent almost. It's only a D6 shotgun, but he does have 2 of them, so it's 2D6. Only strength 6, but we're coming in at -3 AP, and if you have a 3-up save or better, it becomes damage 4. So I imagine the Moirax War Dogs are very quick. They're 14-inch move. If this guy can bounce between the L's in the center of the table, here and get in on a juicy target, you can imagine a 14-inch move, if you're in this area, can move you pretty quickly, almost all the way around the edge of this L, or through the center to get line of sight on enemy heavy hitters. And that guy's absolutely going to, total a tank or anything it gets a shot on. You can also use the Trail of Destruction stratagem on that guy to ensure that he gets those hits through. A little expensive, not sure that you want to, but if he does get any of those strength 6 shots through, it is going to be a ton of damage on a lot of armored targets. Also, probably just great at killing intercessors. It is a flat 2 damage, goes to 4, so it can punch through any damage prevention that they have. And, just can pick up a unit of intercessors every turn pretty safely. So I do like the inclusion. They're longer ranged and they're a little bit more reliable, but I like a little fluff in there of Graviton Pulsars. And then last but not least in this list, we have a Red Corsairs Battalion featuring a Lord Discordant. Very straightforward battalion, but that will allow them to advance and charge so that Lord Discordant is very fast, and you can bring in the little sorcerer here to fill up the HQ choice and warp time that guy. So he's going to really pull some of the threat off of the Knights as well. Obviously, Red Corsairs Battalion coming in with 3 Chaos Space Marine units means you unlock the additional CP, so that's going to be in there to fuel all of the Knights as well. So it essentially comes in as almost a triple battalion between the Knight detachment and the Red Corsairs detachment. So we're seeing units of 4 Plague Marines get brought in this list. Each battalion out of 2 in pure Deathguard has 4 Plague Marine units, as well as some support characters in one of the detachments to buff them up. Starting with a Biologist Putrefier, who buffs Blight Grenades used around him. Now, normally you see this guy in a Plague Marine combo list, where they will buff up a group of Plague Marines to hit you really hard with Blight Grenades. It's a 1 CP stratagem that lets the entire unit fire with Blight Grenades instead of just 1. And those Blight Grenades aren't anything to sniff at. They come in at D6 attacks apiece, which is pretty significant to start with. And while they're effectively frag grenades with only strength 3, they do reroll their ones to wound because they're plague weapons. And with Arch Contaminator, which I assume will be in this list, they can reroll all of their wound rolls. Plus, with this Biologist Putrefier coming in, they are strength 4, 2 damage with full rerolls. In addition, anyone in their aura that throws that grenade will deal an additional mortal wound on a roll of 6. Now, the combo you can pull off is you can protect a big unit of Chaos Space Marines with Cloud of Flies, move them up within range of those Blight Grenades. They are only range 6, which is a little tough. When you get to throw them, you let everyone throw the Blight Grenades, and then, with that +1 strength, you use Veterans of the Long War, so they get +1 to wound, which triggers their mortal wounds on 5s instead of 6s. This means that you're getting potentially 10 or 15 D6 attacks into your face, each one dealing 5s on a 5+, with a reroll available. Now, Don's only brought small units of Plague Marines in this list, so the combo is still available. I think bringing it on a big unit and trying to protect them and get them off the board, they are super slow, being only move 5. So that's a little dicey. So he's opted to take these smaller units and still has that combo available to him, but in more compact packages. The other thing that each of these units brings is 2 Flails of Corruption. Now, each of these flails is going to be a strength 6 weapon with 2 damage, but it uses the flail mechanics, so every attack swings D3 hit rolls, and damage carries over between models. It means that each of these little 100-point units can trade up enormously against massed infantry. So with that being the case, that means that these little tiny 100-point packages are going to bring a lot of horde hate to fight the list that we're going to see in the new 2020 meta to take advantage of the easier ITC objectives. We also see another little micro combo here with a Foul Blight Spawn, who once per game can fire 2 D6 Blight Grenade attacks. That'll also benefit from the Biologist Putrefier's buff. And then last but not least, we have a Tallyman, who's one of the Deathguard's only sources of CP regeneration. In the other battalion, we have essentially the same thing, 2 more Malignant Plague Casters as well as 4 more Plague Marine units in Chaos Rhinos, bringing us to 8 Rhinos and 40 Plague Marines, all with double Flails of Corruption, coming in just to continue to pound you to death. The other thing I should mention about this Foul Blightspawn is that he has a 7-inch aura of Fight Last, which means that charging into this mess of Flails of Corruption potentially means that you kill 1 or 2 before the rest of the list absolutely pounds you into dust. If you try to multi-charge a bunch of different Plague Marine units, as long as they're bundled together in a little castle, all of the rest of them are going to hit you before your second or third units come in. So you have to be able to pick it apart 1 unit at a time, which is a problem because they are Plague Marines, and nothing in the army is particularly easy to kill. Those Rhinos also give it a ton of board presence and a lot of screening, as well as just being annoying models. Like, they're 67 points, and you have to get through 11 wounds at toughness 7, which is just sort of annoying, and they can go in and tie up guns and just be obnoxious. Overall, this list seems incredibly powerful and very well suited for the 2020 packet, and I'm very excited to see it on the table. We have Guy Appleton here, continuing the Chaos stream, talking more about Chaos, bringing a fairly meta list, a triple Lord of Skulls in Iron Warriors. So this is a pretty meta list that we started seeing around the beginning of the year. 3 Lords of Skulls got a big points decrease in Chapter Approved, and coming in and just essentially being, slightly more harder to kill on a Knight chassis for a couple less points, and being Heretic Astartes, so they can be affected by caster's psychic powers. A lot of these Lords of Skull lists basically go hard aggro between all the Lords of Skulls. They bring in Lords Discordant and other demon engines, which you are seeing in these Venom Crawlers here. Venom Crawlers typically tend to be a fairly efficient choice. They're not the most popular because I think they're a little dicey, but they do bring some pretty solid shooting as well as decent melee, and will benefit from the +1 to hit from a Lord Discordant with their 6-inch aura. Interesting that we're not seeing a Soulforge pack here, so these guys won't have the ability to advance and charge, but we are seeing a patrol detachment of Chaos Demons to bring in this Bloodmaster, who has a 6-inch aura of +1 strength to Khorne demon units. That's why we're seeing the Mark of Khorne on the Lord Discordant and the Venom Crawlers, as well as the Lord of Skulls, because all of those have both the Khorne and the demon keywords now that they have Mark of Khorne, so they're going to benefit from that guy's little aura. So far, pretty standard Lord of Skulls stuff, and I am interested to see this list more on the table. It's very dicey. It's an enormous skew, and some lists can take care of it, and some lists can't, and I'm interested to see who is able to deal well with it in this tournament. We have Patrick coming in here, one of our 2 pure Eldari players. We have a Craft Worlds detachment, using the Expert Crafter's Masterful Shots combo to get the reroll hit and wound, as well as ignoring cover, bringing in a bunch of Shadow Weaver support weapons for a ton of indirect fire that is very consistent between the Autarch for rerolls, as well as that Expert Crafter's buff. There's also a Farseer Skyrunner in there for Doom and potentially Executioner. So you can Doom something, get a bunch of those Shadow Weavers on it, and each one of those Shadow Weaver platforms is pretty close to a Night Spinner. They only have 1d6 shots and only strength 7, only 1 damage, which is a big downside, but you're bringing 8 of them, and each one of those is going to get one of those reroll hit and wounds. All of them are indirect fire, and all of them are ignoring cover, so it's just an immense amount of firepower and a bunch of weight of dice that you can eventually wear your opponent out. These sorts of support detachments that bring in a lot of ranged firepower, he does have Rangers in here to help out as well, but this heavy artillery support is helped out by the fact that the rest of the list is hyper aggressive. We're seeing 3 units of Skyrunners in a Harlequin's detachment, 2 units of 5, as well as a unit of 2, all with Haywire cannons to blast down vehicles. So he's not going to be quite as worried about heavy armor because those support weapons don't do multiple damage, but these Haywire cannons are each going to be hitting vehicles for a couple mortal wounds all at once. We have a Shadow Seer in there for, I assume, the double move on one of these Skyweaver units. And they can help screen this Farseer Skyrunner so he can move forward and doom whatever wants to get taken out. Overall, I love seeing these Skyweaver lists because watching them play on the table is really cool. The last detachment in the list is the Drukhari side of it. This is a pretty standard detachment. We have a Written of the Living Moves Archon, as well as 3 Ravagers to fire Disintegrator cannons. Overall, pretty straightforward. We have a lot of fire support hiding in the back between 3 Ravagers and 8 support weapons platforms with Shadow Weavers. Ravagers are very solid anti-tank shooting. The support weapons are very solid anti-infantry shooting, and then the Skyweavers can, clean up stuff in melee as well as take down heavy armor with those Haywire cannons and really root enemies out. Skyweavers also give you a lot of forward presence on the objectives, so you can score bonus points and those maneuver secondaries. So overall, a very well-rounded Eldari list, and it's going to be very cool to watch. Lord Solar in here is bringing kind of an old staple from the 2019 meta. He's got a loyal 32 of Guardsmen, 2 company commanders, 30 infantry, with essentially no upgrades, as well as we do have a Manticore coming in for a little bit of indirect fire. But then the next detachment is pure old Custodes. Adeptus Custodes, the golden boy, seeing the table. We have Trajan Valoris for those reroll ones, a shield captain on Dawn Eagle Jetbike, following up with 6 Virtus Praetors and a Vexillus to give -1 to hit to that Manticore, as well as all of these Caladius Grav tanks with accelerator cannons. This is a very in-control Jeff Robinson style list. And it's going to be awesome to see this, kind of, if the Caladius Grav tanks post their nerf, are going to be able to deal the damage. We do have one heavy blaze cannon on one of them, so that's going to be able to shoot a much heavier anti-tank shot, rather than the essentially auto cannons that these guys bring. We have an enormous aggressive unit from these Virtus Praetors that can absolutely put out the hurt in the midboard of the table, which is going to be very important in the new aggressive, in this new ITC format. As a side note, it'll be interesting to see if Virtus Praetors sort of come back in, now that Imperial lists need to put more forward pressure on their opponents to score in ITC. That said, Blood Angels, the new Blood Angels from Blood of Baal, have been so insane that I think they're sort of pushing Custodes out of the meta. Hopefully, the War of the Spider can help Custodes out a little bit to make them more efficient. They are very expensive. You know, this one unit's coming in almost 550 points for a unit that still will get taken out by a bunch of, anti-tank firepower. That said, elsewhere in the tournament, we have seen a lot of tech to fight hordes, which is not going to be very good against the unit of Virtus Praetors with 2-up saves and 1,000,000 wounds. So, it might be a strong call to start bringing in these heavier, punchy units that can still move forward and threaten the center of the table. So next up on the list, we have Seabiscuit bringing in the pure Space Wolves. Now, as you may know, in one of my recent videos, I gave Space Wolves a little bit of shit. I said that they weren't that good, and that they have a bit of a confused faction identity. And I cropped a lot of crap for that video. A lot of people are happy with Space Wolves are post-Saga of the Beast, and I don't know if they're in that good of a spot. So, it's up to Seabiscuit here to prove me wrong in this T5S2 event, and prove to me that Space Wolves can compete on their own without souping into anything else just for characters or something like that. He's bringing a Wolf Priest and a Wolf Guard battle leader in a battalion with a whole bunch of Blood Claws. 3 units of, it looks like 8 Blood Claws, 6 standard Blood Claws with a pack leader, as well as a Wolf Guard leader as well. And as well as drop pods for those guys, and space in those drop pods to fit in some other model, some other character support. We have a Wolf Guard battle leader in here for the reroll ones, as well as a Wolf Priest, which is going to be super important, along with a Wolf Priest with a jump pack. And I have to imagine we see him come in here with a Canticle of Hate for +2 to charge. It looks like a lot of this list is going to be relying on bringing models in from reserve and then making charges with them. Obviously, the Wolf Priest can start on the table to get that Canticle off. It is a 6-inch aura, and he can run up the table pretty fast with his jump pack. You can then bring in the drop pods with the Blood Claws, and with that +2-inch charge, they're only going to be needing to roll up a 7-inch charge to come in out of Deep Strike. They have a reroll potentially from Ragnar Blackmane, or if they're near a Wolfen unit, they can additionally reroll that roll as well. And as soon as one of them makes a charge, you can spend a CP for the Pack Killer stratagem, because this is a Stalker Pack Specialist detachment, and that will give the next unit a 3d6 rerollable 7-inch charge. The big downside is that you have to come in on those 7s, and a 7 rerollable is fairly reliable, but not very reliable. It's coming in at somewhere around a 75% chance, but I think everybody who's rerolled 7s to make a charge knows exactly how strenuous that is. That said, he has 3 shots at it, so if either of the first 2 make contact, the next one's going to be at that 3d6 +2. So theoretically, if you can combo those off, you can get those Blood Claws into melee, and they are pretty scary. Each one of those Blood Claws is coming in with 4 base attacks. One off their profile, 1 for their chainsword, 1 if a Blood Claw charges, thanks to their Berserk Charge ability, and 1 more just from the standard Space Marine Shock Assault. That Berserk Charge also affects the Wolf Guard Pack Leader, who's coming into the Power Fist, and the Blood Claw Pack Leader, who's coming into the Power Fist, and 2 base attacks. So those guys can swing in with 5 Power Fist attacks. A pretty reasonable damage output for only 120 points plus a drop pod on these guys. The big question is whether you can make those charges, and it looks like Seabiscuit has included the combos in his list to be able to do so. I think the hope is that these Blood Claws can trade up and put a lot of pressure on his opponent for these Wolfen to come in. I don't believe that he has enough drops to be able to deep strike all of the Blood Claws and all of the Wolfen, because there's not a lot else left in the list. But if he is, then that's going to be an immense amount of damage coming in. We have 3 Rune Priests as well in this last Supreme Command detachment. It looks like we're going to throw some debuffs and some nukes out there. The Space Wolves do have a pretty powerful Psychic Discipline. I love the inclusion of this last guy, this Phobos Armor Rune Priest with Temporal Corridor. This guy is just like he's a little tiny assassin. I love him. He's so cool. The reason that this is cool is because he's bringing in the Saga of the Hunter Warlord trait, which allows you to advance and charge. And that becomes a 6-inch aura if he's able to successfully charge any enemy unit. And you know what's cool about that is it becomes pretty easy when you can Temporal Corridor yourself. And advance during the movement phase, and then if you get that spell off, you roll 3d6, pick the highest for an additional advance, and then you can charge afterwards. It is a tough spell. It is a warp charge of 7, but if he's able to get that off, he can become a little speedy boy himself, run around, grab objectives, and just be totally annoying. And alternatively, if he's able to make that charge, he gives that a 6-inch aura. I love this little combo on this guy. I think he's really cool for 101 points, and it's probably the coolest use I've seen of a Phobos Armor Librarian. Normally, they're just up there to get a little closer and cast some spells, but this guy seems like he could actually do some work, which is pretty awesome. So hopefully he's able to do some cool stuff on the table. Overall, like I said, I do give Space Wolves a lot of crap, and hopefully CBS is able to prove me wrong. So I'll be excited to stream some of these Space Wolf games and see some of these combos go off. Continuing on the Adeptus Astartes train with Ronan. Ronan's coming in with a pure Ultramarines list. Not something that we've seen very often, but as Tactical Doctrine becomes more and more value, and especially Ultramarines' ability to stay in Tactical Doctrine longer than any other chapter, I think their value went up quite a bit from pre-FAQ when there wasn't really a reason to take them over Iron Hands, since Iron Hands basically had their chapter doctrine on top of their own one. Overall, this is a pretty standard list with a little bit of Ultramarines flair. We're seeing the Apothecary come in for the 6-inch Feel No Pain aura, 3 Thunderfire cannons just to shoot at people, pretty straightforward stuff. A whole bunch of intercessor squads. It looks like we have 6 5-man intercessor squads to fill out 2 battalions, as well as a bunch of Primaris characters. It looks like all of the characters in the list are Primaris, actually, which is a little interesting. Besides Sergeant Cronus, who I believe is going to be sitting in this whirlwind here. The Ultramarines flair is that this list has 13 aggressors in it, 2 max units of 5, as well as a unit of 3. That is very, very spicy. The reason that aggressors are so cool with Ultramarines is that because in Tactical Doctrine, they always count as being stationary. Plus, Tactical Doctrine is where you want aggressors to be anyway, because that's when they get their +1 AP on all their massive number of shots. So these guys, as long as they don't advance, can just move and continue to blast away. Bringing 3 units means that you can use your redeployment strat to keep these guys safe on turn 1 if your opponent is able to counter-deploy them. Usually aggressors have a little bit of trouble getting up the table, but it seems like in this we might be able to keep them safe. I'd like to see a Tigerius on here to give whichever unit's most in danger a -1 to hit, but unfortunately looks like he's staying at home. That said, we do have the Apothecary to bring them back, as well as give them the Feel No Pain aura, which is going to be sweet. I am excited to see if these aggressors can beat out a list like Raptor Centurions, which tend to be a little bit more efficient for a similar style of unit. That said, I like looking at aggressors a lot more, so I'm excited to see these guys on the table. So I do wish Ronan the best of luck with his Ultramarines here. Moving down the list and continuing the power armor talk, we have IR Wedge with a mixed Imperium detachment, bringing in 2 battalions and a Supreme Command. The first battalion, this is why I have to talk about this. The first battalion's Deathwatch, and that's sick because I think Deathwatch is freaking awesome. I just played against Deathwatch on the stream earlier today, so if you go back and watch that, it's going to be the round 2 of the Quarantine Crusher tournament. I played Tyranids into Deathwatch. We had an insane game. I won't tell you how it ended, but the scores were pretty close. And it was a lot of high-level 40k. Not a lot on the table actually died. Obviously, all the Gene Stealers got absolutely, totally purged by the Deathwatch guys, but a lot of maneuver play and really interesting options that we both had to consider. Super cool game. Go check that out. And I do love seeing Deathwatch on the table because they're so cool. Look at all these cool things they can do. We have a Watch Captain, a Smash Watch Captain with a Thunderhammer, 3 veterans with all the fixins. They have a Black Shield, they have Terminators, they have Bikers, everything. One of my favorite things in 40k is teleporting around, and which is why I play Grey Knight so often. And Deathwatch can do it almost as well. The fact that they have their Bikers and Terminators means that they could get to drop their teleport homers in the deployment zone, and at the end of the movement phase can choose to teleport back to them as long as no enemy units haven't moved within 9 inches to blow them up. That gives you a lot of flexibility, so you can get out of wraps and you can play a little bit more aggressively with your veterans, or if your opponent isn't that aggressive, you can deploy defensively, then place those teleport homers at the front of your deployment zone and pop your whole army into their face on turn 1. Alternatively, this Watch Captain over here with his jump pack can use his jump pack assault to deep strike down and bring a Beacon Angelus relic, which will allow him at the end of the movement phase to deep strike a unit of veterans from wherever they are on the table to his position. That lets you deploy a unit of veterans. You can reposition it using the teleport Homer. Then on turn 2, when he comes in, you can immediately pop them up to wherever he sits on the board. You also just have a teleportarium strat for 1 CP to drop any unit into deep strike. So all of these veterans can deploy off the board and pop in anywhere they want to deliver 40-ish Stormbolter shots. Overall, Deathwatch are sick. An increase in Hordes list means that their stock is going up quite a bit. And as soon as Deathwatch get access to Doctrines, these guys become very good at killing off Space Marines, so since they will at that point be able to fire their Hellfire weapons with a -1 AP on turn 2 and 3 from the Tactical Doctrine. This list obviously doesn't have access to those doctrines because it is bringing in as its 2nd battalion, not a loyal 32, a loyal 42 of Astra Militarum. This is going to be a custom regiment using the Agile Warriors and Wilderness Survivors traits. That makes them excellent as a screening option because it lets you reroll advance rolls, and if you don't advance, you get cover. It is a little bit of a strange combination of abilities since one of them buffs your advances and one of them requires you not to advance. But assuming you're going to use them essentially as board control, that is going to make them slightly more survivable and make them more annoying for your opponent to kill. That's good because the rest of your list is made up essentially of a Dreadnought gun line. You're bringing in 3 Chaplain Dreadnoughts with their last cannons and a Venerable Dreadnought. Those guys will have the Master Artisan's Successor Chapter trait to get those weary rolls, making all of those shots incredibly accurate. And I do like the little personalized flair here of bringing the Whirlwind of Rage Successor trait, which gives you exploding 6s in melee. That's going to be pretty good when you're hitting people with Dreadnought close combat weapons, so anything that tries to advance on to advance forward onto this formation is going to get absolutely ripped up by all of these big stompy robots. Overall, a very cool list, very flexible, bringing a ton of anti-tank in the Supreme Command that's mostly untargetable, as well as a ton of anti-infantry in the Deathwatch veterans. I love seeing Deathwatch come back into the meta, and I think they make some very cool, very well-rounded mid-range lists, and it's going to be awesome to see them play on the table because they're so cool and flexible. Back in my other summary, I talked a lot about Chrome Rose's Astra Militarum list, so last but not least on this summary is Kthor 90, who's also vying for my attention with a pure Astra Militarum double battalion brigade list. Bringing it together, we have 2 detachments of pure Cadians, one with double tank commanders, one being Knight Commander Pask in the Emperor's Wrath Artillery Company, so that's going to give you access to the artillery benefits like aerial spotters, which is sick, as well as the Warlord trait to ignore cover, which is one of my least favorite things in the entire game. He's bringing in 3 Basilisks in that detachment. One of them's got a Hunter Killer Missile. Check that guy out. He's ready to get you if you come close. And then continuing the Cadian flavor with a brigade of Cadians led by none other than Lord Castellan Creed. That brings in 6 standard unupgraded infantry squads, a couple of characters, 2 astropaths, and an officer of the fleet to fill out elites. So we're not getting too crazy on elites today, but that's okay because we do have another detachment to talk about, as well as 3 standard armored sentinels with multi-lasers. Nothing too special. Last but not least, we have a very cheap heavy support option, bringing in 3 3-man heavy weapon teams with mortars to clear some infantry. Overall, pretty standard stuff, but I do like seeing all these models on the table. And last but not least, we've got a little Tempestus Scions in there to flavor things up. So as you're fighting this enormous number of guardsmen, 100 guardsmen just about on the tabletop, plus 3 basilisks and all these sentinels just to grab objectives and be very quick. We also have a 133rd Lambton Lions Tempestus Scions detachment. This is bringing in the Tempestus Drop Force special detachment, which gives you access to a couple stratagems that'll buff up your ability to disembark from Valkyries. Overall, it's a little bit odd of a specialist detachment since mostly you want to deep strike your Tempestus Scion squads. That said, it does let you bring them down on turn 1 rather than turn 2, so you can bring that plasma gun fire on your opponent, and it doesn't really matter that much if your opponent's screening hard because the Valkyries can fly right over them. As a bit of a side note, I do love that in almost all of these Astra Militarum lists, we've seen an enormous diversity in the regimental doctrines that they've chosen to bring for their Tempestus Scions. Lambton Lions are bringing in an additional -1 AP benefit to all of the weapons in all of your squads. That means that those Hotshot Las weapons become AP -3, and we further buff those plasma guns to be AP -4 and punch right through 3+ armor saves, which is going to be the majority of their targets most of the time. I imagine that this is a response to seeing Sisters of Battle get a little bit more play, since that -3 AP is going to punch right through their ignoring -1 and -2, and even though they're only strength 3, At Toughness 3, the Sisters of Battle are pretty susceptible to hotshot lasgun fire as it is. That said, all these Scion squads are really focused on their plasma guns. Each one's bringing 2 plasma guns and a plasma pistol, as well as a 4 plasma gun command squad, and 2 Tempestus command rods on the primes, so that they're going to be able to to pass out reroll 1s to hit to every single Tempestus Scion squad. That all fits into 2 Valkyries, who can all dump out on turn 1 and try to deal a devastating alpha strike to your opponent. We'll see how well this does. The Valkyries are fairly expensive and add a lot of expense to the list that could be more ground troops. Tempestus Scions normally are screenable, but usually are cheap enough that they're able to attack in a couple of waves and take out your opponent's screens before dropping in their plasma guns. But these guys being able to hit right off the gate alongside 3 basilisks shooting at you is probably enough damage to kill a lot of very expensive enemy units. I am excited to see how K-Thor 90 does with this list, and I am excited to see this enormous horde list with 1 million infantry on the table, really playing into that 2020 meta. So overall, that is going to be our list breakdown for Pod 2 of the T5S2 series. If you are interested in joining the series, like I said, Pod 3 is starting up shortly, and we are taking names on a waitlist for Pod 4 already. So go ahead and hit us up at facebook.com/tacticaltortoise, send us a message, and we will get you on the waitlist for the next pod to open. If you're already in a pod, that's okay. You can join multiple. That's fine. But you do still have to play your 1 game a week for each, so make sure you have enough time to do that so you don't get kicked out. Otherwise, I'm very excited to see where T5S2 goes in the future, and be sure to stay tuned on the channel for live streams and recaps of the games as they happen. We're going to have as much news for you as possible from the competitive scene, and hopefully we can keep this going through this time of social distancing and get everybody playing some competitive 40k. Thanks everybody for watching. Have a great one. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and remember not to get buried under the bayonets of 100 guardsmen and a bunch of Tempestus Scions with plasma guns.